at a section of Scripture that's probably the most familiar section of Scripture to anyone, whether they are believers or not. It's called the Lord's Prayer. Jesus says, pray like this: Our Father, who art in heaven, holy is your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us of our debts as we forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Again, some of the most familiar words that Jesus has spoke. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to just make our way, if you will, through these words, these phrases. And my hope is that you'll have a better understanding of maybe a Jewish worldview and how this prayer, these words would have been received. And also maybe even have a better perspective of how to pray. And that is from Jesus' own perspective, because this is what the disciples asked. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at this particular section of Scripture. But today, what I want to do is just first simply just set the stage for you. What's interesting about this prayer is that it's also found in Luke chapter 11. And in Luke 11, the disciples ask Jesus, teach us to pray. Are you familiar with that at all? Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. The disciples, Jews, who are following Jesus, he is the rabbi, they ask him, hey, can you teach us how to pray? Has that ever just struck you as odd? Why are they asking? Do they not know how to pray? Did they skip out on their Jewish boy upbringing? Because this is something that they would have understood. They would have been very familiar with Jewish prayers. I mean, they start about a young age, and there's various levels as they grow older. Now, we presume that these men were probably in their teens, late teens, maybe early 20s, with the exception of Peter. He seems to be the one maybe a little bit older there, but that's just neither here nor there. That's another discussion that's interesting, but we'll talk about that some other time. So, the question is, why are they asking him how to pray? Have they all of a sudden forgotten? Is there some amnesia happening here? Well, actually, it seems to be the case that this was a very common thing during the first century for disciples to ask of their rabbi, teach us how to pray. In fact, if you were a more strict Jew, right, you had certain times of day that you would pray. So they obviously knew how to pray. And in fact, sometimes what rabbis would do, and you had different rabbis, different perspectives, they would have different approaches to things. They would literally, when they're asked, teach us to pray, they would write up a prayer for them, kind of like a liturgical type prayer, to where at the end of the day, they could not just pray it, but they can contemplate over it. And that prayer, you see, was extremely important and was something that the students would desire, because within that prayer, what they would receive is the rabbi's perspective. So, and then asking Jesus, hey, teach us to pray. What they're literally asking him is, hey, we want your perspective on things. We want to understand things from your perspective. We want to see things from your lens. What say you about what's the most important thing in life? You tell me, what is the most important thing about my life and how I should live and how I should function? You help me understand, how do you interpret the Torah? Remember, interpretations of the Torah, various levels of that. And various rabbis and various people looked at the Torah and they grabbed certain things out and they said, this is the point of life. Here's the focus. And different rabbis would focus on different things. It might be focusing on the poor. It might be focused on happiness. It might be focused on intellectual rigor. It might be focused on family. It might be focused on prosperity, how to be rich. It might be focused on just simply being holy. Lots of different things. And so the students, they're asking for the rabbi to give them the rabbi's lens through which he saw life. They're asking him, give us the yoke, your yoke, so that we might take that, be joined with you, and answer these questions. What's the point of Scripture? How should I see the Torah? Where's my place in all of this? What role do I play in this world in helping bring about its order? What do you say is the most important thing in life? What do you say is the priority that I should be focused on in my life so that I might fulfill my role in the grand scheme of things? This is why students sought after rabbis, to help give them this guidance in the world so that they might find their place amongst God's plan. Now, in order to really understand this, what we need to see is how connected this is to the Jewish worldview, and as how it's connected to their history and how they understood themselves to be, who they understood themselves to be, and what their responsibility was as being chosen by God. This takes you all the way back to Exodus, and it takes you back from God freeing them from the oppression. And he takes them out into the wilderness, and he takes them through a litany of things throughout their history. But one of the things that he did was he gave them the law. Now, the law, from a Jewish perspective, was the most intense, concrete, the best way, the most amazing demonstration of God's love to them. He would love us so much that he would give us this law to help us reorder our lives. And they saw it as their mission because they were in covenant with God. And being in covenant with God, I know we talk about this, we use a lot of language that leaves us scratching our heads if we're honest. And I think sometimes even when we talk about it, we really don't really know what we're saying. We're just repeating the things we always heard. But when you think of covenant, this is how you need to think of it. The divine and the human partnering together. The divine and the human partnering together. And that's how the Jews saw themselves, being partnered with God in this covenant. Now, in a covenant, they saw themselves as having a responsibility. And that responsibility was given to them by God. And it was shown through the law. This is how you order yourself. And you're going to show the world how to order itself. And ultimately would culminate in the Messiah coming. And the Messiah would lead and rule over the Jews and all the nations. And then there would be justice and righteousness and peace. And so each individual Jew, especially as Jewish men, because they are the ones who have the rights, as they're being taught and raised and formed and shaped to understand their history, their ancestry, their purpose, and their goal in life was to fulfill that role. What role do I play in this? Sometimes it was to become a rabbi. Very few, only the best of the best made it there. Sometimes it was just to go do that thing that you've been created to do. And as you do that thing that you've been created to do, make sure you order your life in such a way that it glorifies God. That you mirror the one who runs this house, if you will. And so, in asking a rabbi, hey, teach us to pray, it goes hand in hand with the whole reason why they're looking for a rabbi in the first place. Because when the rabbi would pray, he would give them his perspective. These are the things that are most important. This is how I interpret the Torah. This is why this is important for you. This is how you fulfill the role that you have in bringing about this grand scheme of things, this order, if it will. A term in the New Testament that is oftentimes used to describe this concept is a yoke. Now, here's the thing about yoke. A yoke. We know what a yoke is. Typically, when we think of a yoke, what do we think about? Oxen, we think about them being paired together to plow fields, to do things of this nature, right? And so, when we look at the idea of yoke, I think the concepts of law and servitude are really the things that take hold in us. When we see the term yoke, I think that is the predominant thoughts or concepts or ideas that kind of float around this concept of a yoke, okay? But here's the thing. The term yoke, as many other words that Jesus is going to use in this prayer, are loaded terms. Many of the things that Jesus says in this prayer is to help answer this concept. what his yoke is. And in fact, there's a reason why if you go to Matthew chapter 11, Jesus is going to finally say, hey, so take my yoke. Take my yoke. My yoke. And so the students are asking the rabbi, essentially we could say, hey, help us understand what your yoke is. Teach us to pray. What's the most important thing? How do you interpret Scripture? What do you say about this? Which is why people would come to Jesus and ask him questions. Sometimes it was just simply to get him trapped in a corner. But other times it was, what do you say about, what ruling do you make about, what do you think is the most important thing about these situations? Now, and the disciples asking Jesus, hey, help me understand this. They are essentially saying, what is your yoke? What is the yoke that I'm going to take upon myself as your student? What is that yoke? Now, when we think of the term yoke, there's some things that we need to understand. There are some things that, again, this word yoke is a loaded term. Not only does it have to do with the idea of a burden, as we think about it, as law and as servitude. And sure, the Jews would have connected that concept, okay, with their ancestry, with their history. They would have connected it with Torah, the yoke of Torah, if you will. But there's some other interesting ideas about this concept of a yoke. When you think of a yoke, another way that it's defined, it's the connecting of two things. The connecting of two things, the pairing of two things, bringing two things together. Covenant would have come to mind when it came to the Jews and thinking about the yoke of God. Divine and human connected. There's something that connects them. Covenant, yoke. And so the yoke connected to, so now here's the thing. When you think of yoke and you think of oxen, because you're never going to get that out of your mind, it's always going to be the thing you're thinking about, especially if you grew up with felt boards and all that stuff in church, right? The idea of a yoke, it connects two things. And typically when we think about a yoke connecting two things, we think about a yoke connecting two what? Two oxen together. That's not the yoke. That's not what the yoke does. The yoke connects the two oxen to who? The one who is driving the team. The one who is running the ship, if you will. The one who is running the house, if you will. Okay? So when you think of yoke, yes, it does. Not only is it the idea of law and there's these responsibilities, think Torah, but it's also the idea of something, two things have been joined together that aren't necessarily naturally joined together. In one realm, you think of the animal being yoked to the man. In this instance, it is man being yoked to God. But see, this is where it really gets good. Because those are ideas that come forth from the concept of yoke. But you know what the word literally means? The beam between the balances. That's the word yoke. The beam between the balances. I find that extremely interesting. And it's tied up, all three of these ideas and concepts are tied up into this word yoke. The beam between the balances. That is the thing that has the power to level things, to balance things, to bring about justice and righteousness and peace. Now, let's go right back to the Jews and their ancestry and what they have understood about their place and their position in this world. Remember, the Jews saw themselves as being free from oppression by God. And by being free from oppression by God, they were given a law to help them reorder their lives. And in taking this law, they take it to the world. Eventually, it would come out to the world and would free the world from oppression and help them understand how to reorder the world. And ultimately would culminate in the coming of the Messiah, who would rule over not only the Jews, but the world. And by doing so, would bring about a balancing of powers. Justice, righteousness is oftentimes the word that is used. This peace. The Jews knew things weren't right. Let's go to a first century Jewish mindset. They knew things weren't right. Things aren't okay, right? Things aren't working out necessarily the way they want them to. And anytime somebody tries to rise up and push an insurrection, what happens? They beat down. There seems to be no way of getting over this. They look around and look at the world. Israel isn't what Israel used to be, right? Things the oppression is still there, and they feel it, and it's an intense, it's a volatile environment. Like when Jesus comes and does his ministry, look, they weren't all showing up at IHOP eating pancakes, okay? Like, good luck even getting bread at times. Good luck feeding your family. Good luck with being able to pay the taxes. Good luck with getting along. And who cares about getting ahead? It's about making it through each day. Making it through each day. And so the disciples would have felt that tension there. Things are not right. The balance of powers, they're down here. They're being oppressed. How? And here it is. Through the rabbi's perspective, through the rabbi's lens, the yoke they would take upon themselves, helping them understand how they are to, what's most important to them, what's most important to in their life, what is the thing that they should focus on, and helping fulfill their role in bringing about the balance. The balance. Okay? So when the disciples asked Jesus, teach us to pray, it's a loaded question. And they're asking for a lot. And Jesus so eloquently explains to them exactly what that perspective is. And I love how Matthew sticks this in the Sermon on the Mount right there where he sticks it at. Because not only prior to this prayer, Jesus, as you'll see in the next couple of weeks as we go through this prayer, Jesus has already addressed some of this stuff. But then he will continue to build on that as Matthew records for us and explaining what this is. See, I think what the disciples are asking is an extremely important question for several reasons. Number one, they're asking for a new perspective. Help me see something that I don't see. Help me understand something that I don't understand. Help me figure out and wrestle with what I see in the world and what my role is and what's going on here. We have this law, but it's not doing what we think it's supposed to be doing. The things that we think are going to happen aren't happening. What do I need to do here? What is the yoke that I need to carry now? How do I partner with God in doing this thing? They're seeking a new perspective, and I think that's important. And they're also asking, right? What is the most important thing? What's the point of the Torah? How do you interpret it? Help me understand. How am I supposed to perceive this thing? Remember the traditions of the fathers? That's where all that comes from. Not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how it was used. Help me understand what it is. How do I see the Torah? What's the point of this thing? Like, what impact is this thing supposed to have on my life? Because, man, it's sure not working out too well for us right now. Help me understand what's the most important thing to focus on in life. Help me understand what it is that I need to do to fulfill my role and my responsibility in carrying this yoke. As I said, I think that's important questions because I think those are questions that we also need to be asking ourselves. The first reason why I think it's important is because they're seeking a new perspective. I think that that's the most important thing. And I think that's where you have to start. Seeking a new perspective. Do you understand the concept of mercy? That seeking a new perspective is wrapped up deeply in the roots of the concept and the ideas of mercy. Because mercy is the idea of putting yourself inside the skin of another. And so when Jesus teaches parables and stories and he talks about mercy, say one where the servant was forgiven his debts by the king, but he turns right back around and he doesn't forgive those who owed him something. He did not show and demonstrate the same mercy. The ideas that are put up in that story is the idea that the king in that moment saw things from his perspective and put himself inside his skin, walked a mile in his shoes and said, you know what? Forgiven. Your debt is done. But yet he failed to turn around and do the same thing. To seek a new perspective. While the reality was, he already understood what that was like. Or at least he should have. Shouldn't he? Seeking a new perspective is important. Because there's always more going on than what we realize. There's always layers to things. There's always more happening and more that we can understand. More things, information that would help us to respond intentionally, which is what response is, instead of knee-jerk reactions, reacting, right? There's more happening here. Seeking a new perspective will help us go way further down the road and probably cause us to ask for forgiveness a whole lot less. Seeking a new perspective. That's key. But they're seeking a new perspective not just upon life, but based on Torah. Help me understand how I'm supposed to read this. What's the most important thing about this? How am I supposed, and that's the question we need to be asking ourselves. Like, what am I supposed to do with this scripture stuff? How am I supposed to handle this? Is it working out for us? And I can argue in many ways it's not. What's the perspective that I need to have with this book, if you will? And is my perspective right? Is it good enough? Is there something that I'm missing here? Is there something that I'm not seeing? Or there's some abuses on my part? There's some misunderstandings. And so I think the question is imperative for us too. Are we seeking new perspectives? Which could take you further down the road and say, are you even teachable? When somebody gives you a new idea or tries to, when somebody disagrees with you, right? Do you feel that burning, that hotness in the cheeks? You feel that internal just uncomfortableness because you might not be right. And that's a problem. Are we even teachable? There were some people who, in Jesus' day, didn't demonstrate themselves as being teachable. Are we more like them? Or are we more like the disciples, which is what a disciple is, a student saying, hey, give me your perspective. Help me understand. Help me wrestle with these things. Now, in Jesus' day, the students weren't just about, hey, help me understand what you have to say, that I'll make a decision on my own. And I'll go, no. They were about to mimic every single thing the rabbi did, from how he ate to what he did when he was done using the restroom. It was way more detailed than what we can even fathom. But I still think the idea of seeking a new perspective is important. And so the question is, do we think we already got it sewed up? We already got it all figured out? Are we asking questions? Are we willing to be silent for a moment and to listen, and really listen, without even giving a response to something that is quite different, maybe than what we believe or what we see or what we understand? So I think it's important because they were seeking a new perspective. But it's also important because of the questions that were inherent in this idea of teach us to pray. Give us your perspective, right? What is the most important thing in life? And are those questions that we're asking ourselves. What is the most important thing in life? Is it my job? Is it my family? Is it what I drive? Is it how much money I make? Is it the kind of clothes that I wear? Is it my religious how many verses that I can quote? How much of the Greek that I know, right? Or the Hebrew. I'm jealous of people who know Hebrew because I don't know Hebrew at all. I have to rely on way more people for that. Is that what it is? How big I can grow my beard, or how skinny or thin that I can get, right? Well, what's the most important thing in life? Where I live? Or these questions and here's the thing. You can ask that question and you can give the answer that you know should be right, but it ain't your answer, right? Oftentimes we go to answering these questions and we just put an answer in there so we can go on to the next question. Do yourself a favor and answer it honestly. What is the most important thing in life? What is it? And then, what is the thing, the priority that I need to be focusing on in my life to fulfill my role? Why I am here. And as Christians, you understand that there is this concept that's carried over to us as being in a covenant with God. You don't understand what that means, right? And you see it through Jesus. Divine becoming flesh. Human and divine partnering together, for we are co-creators. Some of your translations might say co-laborers together with God. Something is happening here. Something is going on here. And we are a part of that process. The question is, do we even realize what that is? Do we even understand the role that we play in helping the world reorder itself under God? That's the message. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Seek first the kingdom. Reorder your own life under God so that you might be able to help others reorder their lives under God, and by doing so, helping bring more order and structure to the world. That's in the prayer. That's in the prayer. So the question is that something we're seeking? Is that something that we want to know? Are we concerned about that? And I suggest we should be. And so over the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a break in there because of the 15th anniversary. But it's going to be okay. I'll preach 2 hours the next week, and we'll recap everything and be good to go. There's so much in this thing, and I absolutely love it. Like this is I love this stuff because what this prayer does, I believe, is it helps to it provides us a new vision for life for all of us. For all of us. And in doing so, I think even we get a glimpse into maybe what was happening when Jesus would go off to pray. Because this prayer illustrates to us his vision, the lens through which he sees life, what he feels is most important, how he even interprets Torah, etc., etc. But he hits them right where they are. And he reaches way back into their history, and he uses words that would bring up images of things that they heard about, learned about as little boys growing up. And so as we go through this prayer, this is what I hope you'll do. I hope your approach will not be, oh man, the Lord's Prayer, everybody knows the Lord's Prayer. I mean, it's like 50 million people, and those are always boring sermons. Just give me a chance. Just give me a chance, because this is so rich. May your perspective be this. What's in this that I don't understand? Is there a new perspective that will help me understand this even better? Bring to light some new truths or some truths that I have not seen before explained within this. What is it within this prayer that maybe I haven't seen? What is there in this that I can learn from me today? And then as we go throughout the weeks asking these questions that will be answered. They are answered in the prayer to some degree. What is the most important thing in life? How should I be looking at? How do we look at Scripture, and what do we take away from this? What is the thing we're supposed to learn about this thing? Then, what should I be focused on in my own life so I fulfill my role? That's why I think this prayer is so important, because it helps to give us a new vision for life for all of us.